Now it's my pleasure to bring up one of our true partners in all of the broadband work that we do, Mr. Mark DeFalco. He is our program manager at ARC, Appalachian Regional Commission, worked extremely closely with us on all of the phases of the broadband. Mark has worked in the telecommunications industry for over 30 years. He worked for a regional Bell company, a rural telephone holding company, a large interchange exchange carrier, and several competitive local exchange carriers. Mark specialized in competitive market entry and inter-carrier compensation issues. He's testified before the public service commissions and state legislative committees in over 20 states. He currently works at ARC, and as I said, he's our program manager, works with us hand in hand on all of the broadband work that we do. Please give a warm welcome to Mr. Mark DeFalco.
Thank you, Lonnie, and I would like to first start off by thanking Lonnie and Larry and also Hilda, because Hilda was involved, well, she's involved in all things in Kentucky, but Hilda was involved in setting this up and having me come, and she said, Mark, we'd like you to speak, and I said, what would you like me to speak about, Hilda? And she said, tell us your vision and how to make it happen. So I am here to give you ARC's vision and some ideas on how to make it happen. And I say ideas because the devil is in the details, and it is very hard to make it happen. So Appalachia really is not very different from the rest of rural America. And we have our challenges, and in eastern Kentucky, we're fighting loss of coal mining jobs and a lot of distressed areas and a lot of poverty. But when you really get right down to it, a lot of rural America has those same issues. So Appalachia is not that much different. The vision is to have ubiquitous broadband coverage across our country. And from ARC's standpoint, we want our region to be the same as the rest of the country. Not necessarily better, although we'd like it to be better, but certainly not worse. So that's the vision. And if you look at the reasons why this is necessary, and I don't think we have to go into why is broadband important. I think we're beyond that, but your sectors of the community, or your sectors of your community, your business sector obviously needs broadband to be successful. You know, the economy is no longer local, it's local, regional, national, and international, and the business sector needs broadband to be able to succeed. Healthcare. I think one of the most underutilized areas of broadband today is in the healthcare field. So much more can be done. But to do it, you need to have broadband access, and you need to have it at the household level, because that's where the people who need the connectivity for the telehealth applications are. It would reduce the specialists who are not in these rural areas could be connected to the rural areas via access. And in areas where you don't have enough doctors, there's so much that could be done in the telehealth sector. Education. Commissioner Rosenworcel at the FCC has for years been talking about the homework gap. Rural students who cannot get access, who go home and they can't do their homework because they just don't have the access to be able to do it. Some schools, even some rural schools, have implemented flipped learning where they do the lecturing on YouTube videos and talk about it the next day in the class. Well, how could you talk about it if you don't get it? And digital textbooks. A lot of school systems are going to digital textbooks. If you can't access your textbook when you're doing your homework, you're in big trouble. And so many aspects of government, too, where you could use broadband to make your community better. So the vision is that ubiquitous broadband coverage, but the reality is it's very difficult to get there. So Kentucky Wired is going a very long way toward setting up the vision for Kentucky. Every county is going to have big pipe broadband brought in. It's going to go to designated anchor institutions and be then available to tap into that for the rest of the community. So it's truly going to be a first. There's really nowhere else in the country where every county will have gigabit quality service available. This will be a first. But having that access, does not mean that the broadband is going to reach the businesses, the small businesses, and the households. What you need is last mile access. Kentucky Wired is a middle mile facility which will put that big pipe close, but you still need to find a way to get that distributed to the households and to the small businesses throughout eastern Kentucky. And you need to have the backbone to be able to tap into it, but you need to have the last mile facilities to utilize the backbone. So it's not really a chicken or the egg, you need both, and Kentucky Wired will bring the backbone close, but now it's up to you as community leaders to find a way to say, how do we get this broadband gigabit service that's close to us to us? So let's look at some of the last mile connectivity choices and what local leaders can try to do to make this happen. But before we do that, I want you to consider a couple of things. The first one is your community ready for this? And to do that, you might need to do broadband promotion and broadband adoption. Because what happens, and we have some providers in this room, I think AT&T is here, I think Windstream is here, I know Roy Baker is here with a cable company, and for all of these providers, when you go into rural areas, a lot of times what happens is they put in the facilities and 10 or 20% of the people who have the broadband available take the broadband. We call that the penetration rate. And when you only have a penetration rate of 20 or 30%, that means it's real difficult for these providers to say it was really worth spending all of that money to put in those last mile facilities, and only 20 or 30% of the people are taking it. And what's worse than that is if you put in different tiers, different levels of broadband, the vast majority are taking the very lowest tier. They're taking the least expensive broadband available to them. Might be 10-1 service, 10 megabits coming down, 1 megabit going up. The FCC has defined broadband as being 25 down and 3 megabits up. That's the current definition. But what's happening is a lot of the folks in these rural areas are taking the bare minimum. Okay, it might be because of what they use it for. Certainly if all you do is email, that's probably worth it to you. But if the kids have to do YouTube videos or if you do streaming, it probably isn't. So maybe what you as a community leader need to do is you need to work on promoting broadband, helping people adopt it, know what it is, know how to use it, and maybe your small businesses need help too, because it isn't a matter of understanding how to use broadband, it's why to use it as well. And Michael Curry with Strategic Network Group, who I know SOAR has brought into some conferences to talk with, he put together a really nice analysis of things like if you're a small business and you're using a level of broadband to do certain things, you could expect to have this amount of business activity. But if you integrate that into maybe a new website, maybe social media, your utilization goes from X to Y to Z. And the more you do, the higher it goes. So the more broadband applications you put into your business, the better your business does. So small businesses might understand, yes, I need it, but they could also get a tutorial on how to use it better to get better results for their business. You should also consider, if you haven't, a feasibility study to try to help your community determine what do I have available right now, what are my bandwidth requirements, what do I really need today and in the near-term future, and then what are the steps that I could take to get there. And we're going to talk about some of those steps, but every step has a pro and it has a con, and we're going to discuss that a little bit. So lastly, before we get into the hows, I would encourage you to work with your local broadband providers that you have in your community today, because to a degree, they're invested in your community, some more than others, quite honestly, but they're invested in your community. They're there right now. They're bringing a degree of broadband right now, And if you could work together with them, this might be an easier nut to crack than if you try to do it absent their help, and you run into then adversarial issues that make going forward very difficult. I would also encourage you to put together, if you haven't already done it, a broadband council or a broadband team, or somebody, designate somebody in your city or county who's the broadband guru, who's the go-to guy, who's tasked with trying to find ways to make this happen. And there are things you could do. There are things with access to right-of-ways. There are things with access to towers or access to high points in the county that you'd be able to bounce signals off of and things like that. So let's talk about the options. So the first option is the best, and it's fiber to the home or fiber to the premise. It's actually running the fiber directly to your end point, whether it be a home or a business or a school or a church, whatever it is. It's fiber all the way there. And Kentucky Wired is starting that by giving you that backbone. So what do you need to do to get fiber to your premise? So, Larry, what do you need to do? Get an ARC grant. That's one way of helping. So what are the pros of having fiber going right to the residence or to the business? The pros are it's unlimited capacity, all right? You could get whatever broadband, whatever bandwidth that you need. If you need a gig, it's available. If you need 5 megs, it's available. If you need 50 megs, it's available. Yes, they come with different pricing tiers. Nothing's free. But if you have fiber, you have basically the capacity to get the bandwidth that you need. So there's the pro. Nothing is better than fiber. What's the con? Cost. The cost of running fiber to the premise is exorbitant. And that's the drawback. So what are we talking about? Well, I tell people when they consider broadband, my rule of thumb is 40,000 miles, or $40,000 a mile. And that would be for middle mile facilities, $40,000 a mile. Some people tell me, Mark, you're too low. It's more like 50 or 60,000. Other people say, Mark, you're too high. We could do it for 20. I still see I think my 40 is a pretty good number, but that's for middle mile facilities. When you go to last mile facilities, the price goes way up. Why is that? Because middle mile, you're running a big fiber or a big cable with lots of fibers in it down the road, and you're optimizing the way you do it. You pick the right roads to go down. You pick the ones that have the right access to the poles that you could get on. When you do fiber to the premise, you have to go to every house and every business and every location. And to do that, there's no bypassing the ones that are hard to get to. You got to put up with the cost. So that's the drawback. So costs in the area of $150,000 a mile are not unrealistic. And, you know, that's a lot of money. So there's the pro, but there's the con. So let's look at cable service. All right, the cable providers are providing broadband in many cases, and they do it over a combination of fiber and coaxial cable. It's not as expensive as fiber, dedicated fiber right to the premise, okay? It can provide much higher bandwidth than traditional copper telephone service type DSL, all right? So cable could get up in the 50 megabits or higher category, much higher. So the benefit is still get much higher bandwidth. Roy Baker, tell us the pros and the cons of going with a cable system. Now, Roy, be nice.
Yeah, tell us the bad part, Roy.
Well, I've read that 65% of all high-speed internet customers today are served over hybrid systems like you just described. Now, these systems have been in existence for several years, and the cable industry constantly looks for ways to upgrade. Now, it's cheaper to upgrade a hybrid system like this than it is to go in and totally wreck it out and put in fiber to the home. Now, there are new technologies being developed all the time. Right now, we're looking at DOCSIS 3.1. So my systems currently operate under DOCSIS 3.0 right now, but we're in the process of converting over to DOCSIS 3.1. Now, we'll be able to offer much faster speeds. We'll be able to offer some symmetrical speeds. And 3.1 will be a huge improvement over 3.0. So I guess the pros would be that you can upgrade your system at a much less capital outlay.
Thank you, Roy, and I think you're right on there. And I'm going to take a stab at what the con is. I think what you have, now think back to cable TV, all right? You had rural America. They had terrible TV. In the analog, you had the big antenna on top of your house. It didn't work too good. The cable providers came in and they started running cable TV across rural America. But they concentrated it in the, I'm going to call it the downtown area, but I mean even in a little town, they concentrated it in the nucleus of the community because they had to run cables to carry the TV signal. They never quite made it in the far outlying areas because there's a cost factor. You have to run the cable. It's going to cost too much. The cost benefit is not there to do it. So the cable companies never went into the real rural areas. What did the folks there do? Dish network, satellite TV, right? They used to start with those really big dishes, and now you have the smaller dishes. But it was a satellite TV application. So I think that's your con, is cable is good. It's really good, but it doesn't go everywhere. Roy, does that sound about right to you?
That's exactly right. What I would like to hear discussed is how does the government feel about universal service?
Well, we'll get into that at the end, okay?
Okay.
Yeah,
now,
we'll get into that.
As an independent provider, I build everything that I possibly can, but it has to stand on its own. It has to be something that will at least pay for itself, and hopefully I can make a profit on. But I get no government subsidies. I've never received a dime from the federal government.
Understood.
And I can't go out and build these areas that are 3 or 4 homes per mile. It just will not pay.
See, and that's the same issue we have with trying to get fiber to the home to these rural areas. Again, it's cost. It's a cost benefit, and if these companies cannot at least break even or make something, their shareholders and their owners are going to say, don't spend the money. We're not doing this for intrinsic purposes. We have to make money because we're a business. So, Roy, I'm not going to cut you off, and I want to come back to your other thing, but let me, because of the time, let me go through my couple other things, and then we're going to come back to the issue of subsidy. Okay. Next one is DSL service. Is AT&T in the room or Windstream? I know they were coming. Are they here? Because I don't want to misstate anything, but I'll give you my take on DSL service. DSL service is a means of providing broadband over existing copper facilities. It's really the wires that are going to your house right now to provide telephone service. All right? There's a way you could use those wires to provide broadband. The problem is that it is extremely distance sensitive. And the farther you are away from the central office or the fiber connection point, the worse off your signal becomes. Distance degrades the signal. So it started that the DSL service would be able to go out about 3 miles from the central office. And if you were beyond 3 miles, it didn't work. But through upgrades in technology and with additional costs, the phone companies were able to put in remote terminals, which was a way of running fiber from the central office to a pedestal near a community, and then use those copper wires to go that rest of the way from the pedestal to your house. And it makes that 3-mile limit start over again. So that is a good way of providing broadband in these very rural areas. But again, it's distance sensitive and it's also cost sensitive. So this is where, as Roy mentioned, the pros are you're capitalizing on an investment that has already been made. Those wires are already there. There's the pro. The con is it is not as high speed, so the bandwidth requirements not really good. You could do some things, bonding pairs together to get higher speeds, but usually DSL speeds they're in the meg range, or upwards to maybe 25 or 30 meg, but it's real hard to get real high bandwidth out of the DSL service. So one of the controversies we have right now is the FCC has something called the Connect America Fund. It's called CAF 2. CAF 2 because this is the second round of the Connect America Fund. What the CAF Fund is doing is it's basically giving money to telephone companies to expand their DSL reach further out into the unserved areas. And most of the providers decided to take the money. I guess one of the ripples in it, and actually I think it turned out to be a good thing, was AT&T decided we're going to take the money, but we're not going to use the copper wires to provide the service. We're going to get into the fixed wireless business and try to use our cell towers that is providing your cell service with, and put new radios on the cell towers and put radios on your houses, and we'll provide a wireless broadband service over the fixed wireless system. The other telcos who took this money are extending their DSL reach. The problem is, when the FCC did this, because you're talking about rural areas that have no broadband at all right now, they said the threshold, we're going to mandate you have to provide 10-1 service, 10 megabits down, 1 megabit up. It's below their definition of what broadband is, which was 25 down, 3 up, but it was the best they could do. The money was available to the existing telecom providers, hence Roy's concern that, hey, what about the cable providers? Cable providers, I believe, could work in the reverse auction that's coming up for the areas where the telcos decided not to serve. But it's still a controversial thing because the service level is still low. But again, if you have nothing, 10-1 isn't a bad place to start. The problem is if you get the 10-1, when are you ever going to get the upgrade? Because especially if you're doing it over these copper wires that are very antiquated and not in the best service condition. So the last couple things I want to talk about in ways of getting last mile facilities is wireless. All right, we have wireless service that's available. It could be fixed wireless. There are different definitions of wireless and fixed wireless. My definition for a fixed wireless is you need line of sight. It's microwave radios, and your house needs to see the big antenna directly. Otherwise, you lose the signal. Or a very heavy cloud cover, you could lose the signal. Mobile broadband, all right, that's what you get on your smartphone. All right, LTE service or 3G service. If you have nothing else available, it works. It's not bad, okay? And then the other one is white space. And white space is the vacated TV spectrum. When they went to digital TV, they have spectrum that used to be the old analog TV channels. And that stuff, if you remember, your old twisty antenna, and you get a picture, and then you get the snow, and you get the picture. Kind of goes up and down the valleys a little bit. It kind of goes through trees a little bit. So it's a good spectrum. Problem is it doesn't get out really far, maybe 10 miles. It's about as far as you're going to get with it. But in an area where you have no other alternative, that isn't a bad way to go. So what are the problems with some of these other what are the cons for some of these other services? For wireless service, it's data caps, right? How much do you use this before you get the message saying you've reached your limit? If you use any more, you're going to start paying for the next tier. Okay, that might work okay on this, but what do you do if you're tethering this to a computer and you're trying to run a small business from your home on your LTE service? Your cell costs are going to go through the roof. Fixed wireless usually has a cap to it. So those are in the con area. The pro area, cost. Since I'm not running a wire directly to the house, since I'm not running a wire directly to those small businesses, the cost of deployment goes way down in comparison to having to run that coaxial cable or having to run the fiber to the house. So these are all things that you need to think about as you try to say, how does my community take advantage of this gigabit service that's going to be brought in through Kentucky Wired? How does my community tap into that network? Here's several ways you could tap into it. They all come with pros and cons, and you need to figure out what works for my community. Everybody wants the fiber. It's the best, but it costs so much. Not everybody's going to be able to afford it. And then you got to start saying, okay, could I run the fiber to the business park? Could I run the fiber to the downtown area? Is there something that would work for the outlying areas? Everything comes with a trade-off. And so with that, I am opening this up for questions, although I think, Roy, we talked a little bit about the CAF and the fact that the cable companies were, because they were not an existing DSL provider, were kind of left out of that. So you're absolutely right. My understanding is that there will be a funding panel at the end of today, and there's going to be folks here from USDA, Rural Utility Service. I'll be here to talk about ARC funding. There's other federal funding sources to help with some of this stuff. And some of those monies are available to other providers other than just telecoms. But I'd like to open it up to any questions. We have a few minutes left, not a whole lot of time because I talk too much, but let's do some questions. Yes, sir.
Stand by.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, let me make a comment, an observation on how we can build the civic capacity to help communities prepare for this, and then I have a question. We have the Kentucky Work Ready Community Program, of which almost all the counties in eastern Kentucky and south central Kentucky have got groups that are working on this. Many have already got the Work Ready in progress. Of the 6 designations to get that, to show that your community's got an available skilled workforce, one of them deals with broadband. But what we've encouraged our communities, the 16 counties that I've been working with, is to make sure that you keep those work groups vibrant, working all the time, but then you have a special group like what you're talking about, is how do you use broadband, how do you get broadband, how do you get it to the last mile, but what do you do with it to make sure you improve the quality of life in your community? So if any of you all are not involved in the Kentucky Work Ready Community Program in your counties, please get involved. The question I have is, in our state, our Kentucky K-12 school system is the best in the nation in terms of technology that's been delivered to the schools. So we're very fortunate. So we've had fiber to the schools for over a decade, maybe a couple of decades. So is there any way that fiber connection going to the schools can be utilized by our communities?
My understanding on that is a lot of that was done through the E-rate program, and those dollars funded getting the fiber to the schools, and there were contracts put in place with the providers to do that. And I think the easy answer is no. That was there for school purposes and could not be used for other purposes. There have been some challenges to that, and I think in Alaska there was some waivers that were put in place to allow what you described to happen, but I don't know that that has gone national yet. Yes, sir.
Harry Collins, Letcher County Broadband Board. As far as the schools go, if that partnership happens, it takes away those E-rates and those USF funds that offsets the phones and computer connections within the school, and would turn that district upside down, because you just said that we've lost coal jobs, we've lost the tax base, so those schools could not afford to lose those funds.
I think the intent is actually to go the other way. The FCC right now is looking at expanding the E-rate to provide higher bandwidth to the schools, because they recognize that what the schools have right now is inadequate and they need to have higher bandwidth. You have these one-on-one laptop programs that are taking place all over the country, and I know a number of places in Kentucky are doing that, where every student is given a laptop, and we want to make it so that when the students go home, they could use it. Hilda?
I just wanted to add a comment on that. Some of the things that I've seen happen is where a provider will actually help the school with the E-rate, apply for the funds, get the money, and then that backbone, that big pipe that's already out there, then that provider can bounce off of that. So it can help with an overall plan on the infrastructure without taking away money from the schools. And again, that's thinking in a bigger picture and a total community approach.
Yes, we're hoping there's something called FirstNet, which is a first responder network. It's supposed to be a wireless broadband first responder network that's supposed to be available throughout the country. Because of some of the disasters we've had in recent years, the first responders are finding out that they can't talk to each other. So the intent was to put together a network so that they would, and in doing that, a lot of these rural areas are going to need facilities to be able to put a wireless broadband network in place. And one of the things a lot of people don't think about, when you put together an LTE mobile radio cell phone site, you really need to have fiber running to the cell tower to make it work good. So you have to have fiber out there anyhow. So one of the things we're hoping is that as these providers are putting the connections out to these rural towers, they put extra capacity so that when they put the FirstNet on the tower, they also could then start offering better cell phone service and better broadband over that same tower. So it's hard to get all aspects of the government to work together. We've been working on that. There was a Broadband Opportunities Council that was put together with the last administration. There's a Broadband Interagency Working Group that is in play right now. We're a member on that committee. We meet periodically, and we try to find ways of doing things better. This is a unique challenge. This is a very large country, and the estimates to put fiber everywhere is in the tens of billions of dollars, and the government doesn't have the money to do all of that, so they chip away at it in different ways. But Skip Skinner, you're in the audience somewhere. Why don't you throw your 2 cents in the ring here?
We were successful with just getting those industrial parks and downtown communities hooked together with our initial fiber network, and then we were able to hang different things off of it. Of course, we had the benefit of the Virginia Tobacco Commission, which early on, 15 years ago, dedicated funds to technology, so we made great use of those by putting a lot of fiber infrastructure in. We also utilized as you do here, a lot of public water lines, and we had a kind of an interesting initiative about 15 years ago where we just put conduit in an open public water line, had that paid for by the Tobacco Commission, and then came back and put fiber in it later. So there's a number of different scenarios and partnerships that you can develop, but it is all about partnerships and being able to get multiple agencies and groups working together. Thank you.
Thanks, Skip. Hilda and I were in Atlanta last week, and we were at a broadband conference. And it opened up with a presentation by the city of Atlanta, and then it had a rural community, and they talked about what's possible and what they're going to do. And I got to tell you, I was scared after it was over, because the woman who was with, I believe, the Chamber of Commerce with Atlanta talked about their vision for where Atlanta is going to go using broadband. And this was things that, like running fiber down the roads so that the driverless cars would have connectivity. And I mean, this is pie in the sky stuff, but turning into reality with all the Internet of Things and all the interconnected devices and all the things that they're going to do with that. And then you had the poor rural guy stand up and say, man, all we're trying to do is get connectivity. All we're trying to do is get broadband. And what scared me about it is you have young people who are growing up with this stuff and recognizing how important it is and getting some of it at school, and then, God forbid, they go to college and get real good service at college. They're not coming home. And you folks know what I'm talking about. Your rural communities are skewing older. The young people, the most talented young people, are hiking it out for the cities, and they're not coming back. So unless we find a way to make this work, we're going to dry up and blow away. And we don't want that to happen, and my time's up, so I can't take any more questions, but I'm here all day. I'm here for the panel at the end. Let me know what I can do to help you. Thank you very much.